From the beginning of our marriage, I was constantly tormented by my spiteful mother-in-law and father-in-law. Always nagged for not having children. Even my husband, whom I relied on, said to me, "My sister-in-law is young and beautiful, and unlike you, she gave birth quickly. I really envy my brother." Furthermore, because I couldn't have children, my mother-in-law accused me of cheating. "She's cheating, so I caught it on a hidden camera." She even made such outrageous statements. At that point, I devised a plan to play what my mother-in-law called proof of my affair. During my nephew's first communion, where all the relatives would be gathered. Upon seeing it, my husband, sister-in-law, and father-in-law each uttered, "Just as we thought," with expressions of despair. My name is Mandy Hansen, 34 years old. I work in the foreign business division of a mid-sized trading company. I live with my husband Kevin, who works for a steel manufacturer, and my in-laws. We don't have any children yet. I met Kevin at a social mixer I was invited to by a friend. For years into my job, I was finally getting the hang of it and starting to enjoy the work. I wasn't very interested in marriage, but I couldn't turn down a college friend who insisted on it. As a result, my interest was mostly in the special menus prepared for each venue at the mixer. Quite literally, a case of bread is better than the songs of birds. I felt somewhat detached from my active friend, who hit it off with a man. And Kevin attended with him. Kevin said he was not keen on the event either, dragged along somewhat reluctantly. Somehow, as outcasts, we ended up acting together. But I intended it to be just for that occasion and didn't bother to exchange contact information. However, on a Friday exactly a week after the mixer, I received a call from an unknown number. Initially, I ignored it, but after work hours, calls came every 10 minutes. What's going on, really? Annoyed, I was about to block the number, but decided to check who it was first and answered the call. It turned out to be Kevin from the mixer. "Oh, good. You are Mandy, right?" It was good to know who it was, but I hadn't given him my number then. Kevin cheerfully explained to me, who was dubious. "I got this number by pleading with your friend who was there with you." It seems my friend, who had hit it off with Kevin's companion, decided to start dating following that mixer. Meanwhile, Kevin, having missed his chance to get my contact at the event, heard about it from his companion and got my number by pleading with my friend. Disappointed with my friend for giving it away so casually and Kevin for taking advantage of that, I nevertheless ended up dating him somewhat, and a year later, he proposed, and we decided to marry. It wasn't a passionate love, but I thought I could live a calm life with Kevin, whose character was somehow gentle and likable. There were no issues on my side regarding the marriage. My parents had separated when I entered university. They remain married, seeing no particular benefit in divorcing now. When I mentioned it, my friends and acquaintances asked if I wasn't lonely. But I've always seen my parents as virtually separated, so it felt like a natural outcome. Yet, because they had provided for my college fees, I used to visit my father and mother's homes alternately during long breaks. But after starting my job, I mostly just updated them via social media due to my busy schedule. So, when I told them I was getting married, they said they'd attend if there was a ceremony. But after I mentioned we were just registering and not doing anything special, they sent me a significant amount of money as a wedding gift, which was more than enough for me. However, my mother-in-law Sandra and my father-in-law Danny seemed dissatisfied with how my parents handled my wedding. They said unpleasantly, "It's rather indecent to settle their only daughter's marriage with money." Indeed, it's concerning. But my husband Kevin defended it. "Money is certainly a proof of love. It's crazy for you who have never worked to say such a thing, Mom. And Dad, if you understood how hard it is to earn money, you couldn't say that either." His defense made me think I really did choose the right person. However, the situation began to look grim 4 years into the marriage. The initial trigger was my promotion. Since joining the company, I had worked diligently in my department, and that year, after trying for a promotion, I was offered. Mandy, you mentioned in your job interview that you wanted to be globally active in the future. Didn't you? How about gaining some experience in the overseas business division? I was pleased that my efforts were recognized, and I assumed Kevin would share my happiness. However, when I shared the news, Kevin became visibly upset, shouting, "Oh, so what? What are you trying to say? That I'm important now because I've been promoted, huh?" Surprised by Kevin's unexpected reaction, I wondered if I had said something offensive. "Sorry, I didn't mean it like that." But Kevin retorted, "You always become so self-deprecating immediately. That's proof you're mocking me, isn't it?" He then violently threw his beer can into the trash and slammed the apartment door as he left. Kevin didn't return for a week. He wouldn't read my texts or answer my calls. I tried calling his office, but he was out, and I couldn't reach him. I considered waiting outside his office, but that might have embarrassed him too much. So, I decided to visit his parents' house and consult with them. I expected to be scolded, but I had no other option. Despite the sudden visit, I was surprisingly allowed in immediately. But as soon as I stepped into the living room, Kevin, who was waiting, yelled at me, "What do you want now? Did you come here because mocking me wasn't enough?" I froze to hear that. Of course, I immediately said I had no such intentions, and apologized if I had caused any misunderstanding, but he was not receptive to listening. Not only that, but my in-laws supported Kevin's stance, shouting, "Don't you understand you cannot act all high and mighty as a wife just because you both work? This is why I was against marrying someone with such senseless parents." She yelled just as loudly as Kevin. From there, no matter what I said, the lecture continued endlessly about how I was the one who hurt their son's pride. Eventually, she declared, "Kevin has no intention of returning to the apartment where you live together. If you don't want a divorce, vacate that apartment and live here with us. I'll retrain you on how to be a proper wife." In hindsight, I wonder why I didn't just agree to a divorce at that moment. However, at that time, I still had feelings for Kevin. And having grown up with parents who were essentially in a marriage of convenience, I was probably still naive about what marriage entails. Soon after, I did as my mother-in-law suggested, and moved out of my apartment to live with my in-laws. They were very pleased, but I soon understood why. It turned out that Kevin's older brother, Ben, who was 3 years his senior and lived with them, had moved out about 3 months before my promotion, saying, "I've got a girlfriend, so I'm going to live on my own." My mother-in-law, who had doted on Ben, who graduated from a more prestigious university than Kevin, was devastated, as if struck by a bolt from the blue. But the problem wasn't just emotional. With Ben's departure, the money he had been contributing to the household was sorely missed. This was a big issue because my in-laws, being prideful and loving to show off, enjoyed hosting relatives and serving expensive liquor and meals. Naturally, my father-in-law's earnings from his post-retirement job were insufficient, and Ben's financial contributions had been a lifeline. So they coerced Kevin, who had returned home to complain about me, into convincing him to move in with them. Kevin, for his part, had always felt inferior to his more successful brother, and was suddenly pleased to be the center of attention. I realized this too late, but bad things continued to happen. Soon after, Ben married his girlfriend, Emma, who turned out to be quite a handful. Emma was 6 years younger than Ben and 2 years younger than Kevin and me. She appeared fragile and delicate, the type that instinctively makes men want to protect her. This was true for my father-in-law and Kevin as well, who became noticeably restless and like a retinue around Emma whenever she visited. Naturally, my mother-in-law, not finding this amusing, started to blame me, saying, "Kevin fawns over his brother's wife because you lack appeal. If you just showed us a grandchild, Danny would settle down as a grandfather." She even went as far as to tell me to quit my job and focus on getting pregnant. However, due to the in-laws' wastefulness, the household expenses kept rising, and Kevin's salary alone was not enough to cover them. Even when I printed out the household accounts balance sheet to explain this, she wouldn't listen and would just repeatedly badmouth me. "It's all because you're bad at managing." Always making excuses. Then, Emma got pregnant. Even my mother-in-law, who had been resentful of Emma, caught grandchild fever over her precious son's child. She doted on the newborn grandson, Alex, as if she couldn't love him enough. As a result, she eagerly welcomed Emma's visits, which she had previously avoided, and even started saying things like, "Oh, how wonderful it would be to live under the same roof with such a cute grandson." Then, Kevin also chimed in. "Exactly. Emma is young and beautiful, and unlike you, she gave birth quickly. I really envy my brother." He threw these words at me with a sarcastic tone. My father-in-law also said, "That's true. Why not drive out a wife who can't bear children and live here with Ben's family?" He carelessly made such comments. By this time, even I began to think, indeed, since I don't have children, perhaps it's time to leave Kevin and this house. Then, Emma's second pregnancy was discovered. My mother-in-law's grandchild fever became even more intense, and proportionally, her treatment of me grew harsher. Moreover, under some misapprehension, she blurted out, "Isn't it because you're cheating that you can't have children? Maybe you're worried it'll be unclear whether it's Kevin's child or your lover's." I was so appalled that I ignored her, but one evening at dinner, I noticed Sandra smirking at me. Confused, I asked what was wrong, and she replied, "You were cheating after all, as I had expected." Then Kevin and my father-in-law asked her for details. I caught her cheating, with a hidden camera. I had a professional set it up, and it's perfect. Declaring that loudly, she happily burst out laughing. Kevin and my father-in-law, initially surprised, seeing her fully confident, smirked just like her. If that's true, then it's divorce. Of course. We'll have to make sure she pays a substantial amount of property division. Understood. I will take the opportunity of Alex's upcoming First Communion next week to explain the situation to all the relatives. Thus, the celebration of Alex's First Communion, arranged by my flamboyant mother-in-law at a rented hotel banquet hall, turned out to be a grand affair. The invited relatives seemed somewhat fed up with her boasting, though they enjoyed the food and drinks. As the banquet was drawing to a close and I took the microphone and stepped up to the podium, everyone turned their attention to me. "I'm sorry to interrupt your conversation, but there is something brief I must report to everyone gathered here today." As the crowd murmured in confusion, my in-laws and Kevin, thinking I would admit my faults and discuss divorce, smirked as before. The guest of honor, Ben's family, felt the same. At that moment, I signaled to the staff, and a screen was lowered behind me. As the projector was brought in and the lights dimmed, everyone watched as the video began to play. It started with footage of a suspicious-looking hotel district, zooming in on the entrance of one particular hotel. As expected, the faces of Kevin, my father-in-law, and Emma turned pale. Unaware of what was happening, my mother-in-law looked around curiously. The next moment, a clear video captured the relatives gasping in shock. Indeed, the screen showed Emma and my father-in-law embracing as they exited the hotel. The room fell silent as the video continued to show the two of them hugging passionately. As the screen switched to the same hotel entrance again. This time it was not the father-in-law but Kevin who came out, hand in hand with his lover, Emma. Kevin, along with the father-in-law and Emma, all murmured in unison. "Just as we thought." And stood frozen. The room erupted into murmurs again. At that moment, I paused the video playback, turned the lights back on, and slowly began to speak into the microphone. Well, the announcement I have to make is straightforward. As you have just seen, my husband, Kevin, and my father-in-law have repeatedly had an affair with my sister-in-law, Emma. The evidence was thoroughly documented by the investigation firm hired by my mother-in-law. As I said this and held up a thick file of documents, murmurs of disbelief spread through the crowd again. Waiting for the murmurs to settle, I revealed that the investigation firm had not been hired to uncover the infidelity of Kevin, my father-in-law, or Emma, but rather, my mother-in-law had intended to catch me in an affair to drive me out. I suppose Kevin, who probably disliked my presence, spun some tales about me. It's absurd to believe such things. As I said this with a light chuckle, the relatives all looked at Kevin and my mother-in-law in dismay. When the investigation firm reported to Sandra that they had caught the evidence, she declared victory without even checking the contents. But unfortunately for her, I had no such affairs. I then displayed a photo on the screen. It was a snapshot taken at the hospital when Alex was born, showing Emma holding Alex at the center, with her husband smiling beside her, and Kevin and I, who had come to celebrate, visible in the background. Since Sandra has always disliked me, I believe she didn't have a single clear photo of me. So, she mailed this snapshot to the investigation firm, asking them to catch the evidence of her daughter-in-law's affair. Glancing at my mother-in-law as I spoke, she looked utterly taken aback, realizing she had hit the mark. However, the investigation firm mistakenly thought the daughter-in-law to be investigated was Emma, who was holding the child. As they began their investigation, they unexpectedly caught my father-in-law and Kevin going to the hotel with Emma, believing that Emma's husband was to be investigated. The firm reported back to my mother-in-law that they had captured the evidence on camera. My mother-in-law, mistaking this for evidence of my infidelity, was shocked. Although I was initially surprised when she declared she had proof of an affair, a thought struck me. It was the name of the investigation firm on the family credit card statement used by my mother-in-law. Being a spendthrift, she had me set up a family card under her name to use when her own credit limit was insufficient. I had set up online access to check the monthly charges in advance, because she would make large purchases without consulting me. The next day, I took a half-day off to visit the investigation firm I found online to explain the situation. Upon learning of their mistake, they agreed to take on my request to make amends. They promptly delivered the results. As the screen was removed and the lights in the room were brightly turned back on, Kevin, the father-in-law, and Emma all looked pale. Approaching a great-uncle and aunt, who were highly respected by Sandra and Danny, I asked them, "I'm terribly sorry, but I would prefer not to discuss what follows in front of the children, especially Alex. Could someone please take him to another room?" The great-uncle and aunt briskly approached Emma, picked up Alex, and handed him over to their own children. This prompted other children to be led to another room by several women, leaving behind angry relatives, a dazed my mother-in-law and Emma's husband. Now only the visibly trembling father-in-law, Kevin, and Emma remained under the stern gazes of the family. My mother-in-law, previously shaking, suddenly stepped forward to Emma and exclaimed, "What have you done? How dare you betray your husband and me by cheating with my husband and Kevin?" As she lunged at Emma, several relatives hurried to restrain her, while Emma trembled in fear. The father-in-law and Kevin looked on similarly terrified. However, I decided it was time for the final display. Regrettably, under these circumstances, I must divorce Kevin. I apologize for any inconvenience caused to everyone here. However, according to the investigation firm, this inappropriate relationship among these three did not just start recently. Repairing our marital relationship is impossible. As I said this and covered my face with a handkerchief. Ever since I reviewed the investigation report, I couldn't help but wonder if Alex and the child Emma is currently pregnant with might also be fathered by either my father-in-law or Kevin. It has been incredibly distressing. While I staggered slightly, exaggerating my distress, the women in the room rushed to my side, caressing my back and supporting me while beginning to verbally attack the trio. How shameless they are. Disgusting. Poor thing. The men also surrounded the three with contemptuous looks. The father-in-law and Kevin remained silent, blue-faced, as Sandra's curses and Emma's sobs filled the room. The repercussions of the fireworks I set off that day spread widely. Though initially stunned to learn of his wife's infidelity with his brother and his father, Emma's husband gradually began to seriously suspect cuckoldry I had hinted at. Cuckoldry? That's just a blatant lie by that woman. Alex and the baby I'm carrying are undoubtedly yours. Despite her desperate claims, once a seed of doubt has sprouted, it's not easily dispelled. Stealing a moment away from the resistant Emma, her husband obtained a paternity test kit and the results confirmed his suspicions. Even when confronted with these results, Emma steadfastly denied any cuckoldry, frustrating her husband enough to contact her parents. Caught off guard, Emma's parents were unsatisfied with just his word, and came to my workplace to demand an explanation. Though I found it troublesome, I would have to do it anyway. So I took the next day off to meet them at the law firm I had hired, along with Emma's parents, Emma and her husband. After the lawyer presented the documents and the video, Emma's parents were speechless. Seeing this, her husband smugly remarked, "Didn't I tell you? She betrayed me by having affairs with my brother and father. It's clear that not just Alex, but also the baby she's carrying isn't mine." However, the lawyer interjected, "Could you please discuss that among yourselves? Today's meeting was not to determine the paternity of the children, but to discuss suing your wife for property division." Stunned by this sharp retort, it was clear why my lawyer wouldn't side with her husband. It's puzzling. Emma was not the only one shocked, her parents were too. "I won't pay any money. After all, Kevin cheated with me because you were always too busy with work to be a charming wife. If anything, it's your own fault." Emma retorted mockingly, but I replied, "Is that so? Then we have no choice but to let a third party decide who's right. Perhaps a judge in the court?" At that, it was Emma's parents who turned pale. Indeed, her parents, both teachers at a prestigious girls' school in the countryside, would be scandalized if it became known that their daughter was involved in a sordid affair, and possible paternity disputes with her brother-in-law and father-in-law, possibly to be sued. As soon as I mentioned court, Emma's parents quickly pulled her down from the sofa to the floor and apologized deeply. "We are terribly sorry. We will immediately have our daughter pay the full amount of severance pay you claim." However, at this point, apologies were irrelevant to me. I signaled my lawyer with a look, and we left the room. Later, my lawyer informed me that Emma, her husband Ben, and her parents had continued to cause a scene until he threatened to call the police, after which they finally left, perhaps to ensure silence. Emma's parents promptly transferred nearly double the claimed severance pay through my lawyer. As for me, what happened to Ben or Emma no longer mattered. But I later learned about the fate of the entire in-law family through Kevin, against whom I had claimed property division around the same time. According to Kevin, Emma's husband demanded her a divorce, claiming property division. And he refused to pay child support for Alex, and denied any financial support for the unborn child unless a DNA test proved he was the father. He even declared he would contest the legitimacy of the child upon birth. Despite the resolution of my issues, Emma's parents, fearing for their reputation, forced a reluctant Emma to undergo prenatal testing. The paternity test showed that Kevin, not her husband, was the father of her unborn child. Furthermore, it turned out that Alex's father was actually the grandfather, which was beyond saving. My mother-in-law was shocked to learn her beloved grandson Alex was actually her husband's son. And her mental health collapsed. She has aged rapidly and is now almost bedridden, cared for by her husband. However, Ben demanded both his father and Kevin a severance pay. He even declared to his father, "If you can't pay that money, you can offset it against my inheritance. But I won't care for you in your old age and leave all responsibilities to Kevin." However, his retirement savings was nearly depleted because he had secretly purchased luxury goods and jewelry for Emma in order to attract her attention. Then his father agreed to the settlement. Abandoned by his eldest son, his parents decided to rely on Kevin. However, Kevin himself was also facing payment for alimony and property division to me. In addition to being pressured by Emma, who had been divorced by her brother, saying, "Now that it's come to this, you need to take responsibility for the child in my stomach too," urging him to remarry her. However, in addition to alimony and property division claimed by me, he was pressured by Emma, who had been divorced by her husband, to remarry her. "Now that it's come to this, you need to take responsibility for the child in my belly too. I'm sorry for everything that has happened. I apologize, so please give me another chance. I love you, Mandy." It was clear that he was not seeking to restore our love, but rather looking for financial support and a wife who would care for his family for free. With no remaining feelings for Kevin, I instructed him to handle communication through my lawyer and blocked him except on a social media platform. Eventually, our divorce was finalized. Although there were some disputes, the settlement, including alimony and property division, was paid in 2 installments. According to my lawyer, Emma has continued to stay in the in-laws' house, pretending to be Kevin's wife to outsiders. However, the relatives who were present that day had spread the story, and she was now shunned by neighbors as part of a shameless family, leading her to become reclusive, neglecting to help with Sandra's care or look after Alex and the newborn. Concerns raised by the preschool about Alex's unkempt appearance led to a welfare report. Eventually, Emma's parents took custody of the 2 children, but disowned her, saying, "You are no longer our daughter, nor are we parents to you. Never show your face to us again." With nowhere to turn, Emma, like her in-laws, became entirely dependent on Kevin, who now had to support 4 adults, including his ailing mother, on his own salary. According to a colleague of Kevin's, one of his relatives working at an affiliated company had exaggerated and spread the story, turning Kevin into the subject of a trashy video compilation site. Despite wanting to leave, he continued to work in an uncomfortable environment due to financial necessities. Meanwhile, Emma's ex-husband, for some reason, considered me as a fellow victim, although he had once looked down on me just as much as his parents. And Emma did for me not being able to have children. Of course, whenever we crossed paths at work, I ignored him completely, until rumors spread within our company too, prompting him to voluntarily transfer to a subsidiary in a remote area. Just as everything was settling down for me, I was offered a position at an overseas branch. Although I had always hoped to work abroad, the offer was unexpected, making me taken aback. But my bosses reassured me that it was a recognition of my career and language skills built up over the years. Tired of the sympathy and gossip, I decided to accept the offer and relocate. As I was preparing to leave the US, Kevin sent me a series of cliched messages pleading for reconciliation on the only unblocked social media platform. But I decided to ignore them, thinking I would cancel my phone contract once I moved abroad. Despite all that had happened, being free from that family felt like good fortune. With that thought, I felt ready to face any challenges ahead. Cynical as it may seem, that was my true feeling. Perhaps I had been too humble before. From now on, I plan to think positively and do my best.